4 years ago, we interviewed Gabe Rench days after he was arrested for breaking various local COVID lockdown policies. Finally, his legal battles are over. We can find out how those went and talk to him about other stuff that he has been up to. Welcome to another T.Rex Talk. My name is Isaac Botkin, and I have a guest in the studio, Gabe Rench. It's great to have you back on the show. We have very few returning guests on the show. You are one of them. And in fact, I think you may be one of the first guests that we had on the show back 4 years ago when T.Rex Talk was a live stream on YouTube. We had a pre-recorded interview with you. So for those of you listeners who have been with us for 4 years, we kind of left things at a bit of a cliffhanger. Something had just happened to you, Gabe.
Yeah.
And we never told anyone what happened after the interview.
Yeah, well, thank you for making me feel so special, bringing me back. That's cool. So if your listeners remember 4 years ago in COVID 2020 lunacy world, I was arrested for...
Yeah.
Singing psalms in the public without wearing a mask and not standing 6 feet apart from my friend in Moscow, Idaho. I live in Moscow, Idaho, which is a blue dot in a red state, so a very liberal area. And my city council just went crazy. I don't know how else to explain it, but they initiated this outdoor emergency health order where you had to wear a mask outside, where you could not stand 6 feet apart from your friend. Family members was okay, but a friend was not okay. And so the Pharisees, the liberal Pharisees, initiated this emergency order, and we protested it a number of times. We'd basically go outside and sing psalms and not stand 6 feet apart and do that for 20 minutes and then leave. We wouldn't carry a Molotov cocktail with us. We'd just have our hymn books.
Yeah.
And then...
Compared to... I would say compared to other protests that were happening in 2020 and what is happening on campuses right this very minute.
That's right, sir.
It was the least disruptive thing I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. And so I think after protesting it a number of times in September 2020, there's about 200 of us singing in the City Hall parking lot, and they arrested me and another couple out of 200, ish. They arrested me and another couple, and my arrest went viral, and President Trump retweeted it, just went all over the place. It's just kind of such a bad juxtaposition of like these parishioners singing psalms and holding hymn books, and then the cops arrest us. It just didn't. There's no way they were going to win that battle. I don't know why they calculated that at all. And so
it was weird because by September there was starting to be pushback and video, images, press coming from other parts of the world were making Americans get pretty bad taste in their mouths about lockdowns and other aspects. So it was an interesting time for that to happen.
Well, and I mean, it's been 4 years, but I can still remember like all the hypocrisy from like Nancy Pelosi and the California governor, and then my mayor. My mayor literally officiated an outdoor wedding a month prior to my arrest, not wearing a mask, not social distancing. There were city council members there present. No one was wearing a mask, that kind of stuff. And so the hypocrisy was just so thick in the air. And then they had me arrested. And so I ended up in this 3.5 year legal battle. So to kind of bring everybody up to speed.
Yeah.
I won my...
That was the cliffhanger. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been waiting.
Yeah. I won my criminal complaint, which took about 4 months to resolve because I had a misdemeanor against me. And then Thomas More Society, in fact, I'm speaking at a fundraiser for them this Friday night. They were fantastic. They paid for my lawyers for 3.5 years to go all the way up to the federal court. Yeah. It was a very expensive legal battle. And then we, the federal judge ordered the city to go into negotiations with me. He's like, and he just like laid into the city. If you read his rulings, like, I can't believe the incompetence that the city initiated here. And so he granted me arbitration, or I forget the actual legal word, but we went into negotiations, and then I was able to get my lawyer fees back. I basically we walked away with $300,000. $50,000 went to me, $100,000 went to the couple, and then $150,000 went to my lawyers. So it was a really good legal victory, because financially that's how they speak. That's what punishes them is finances. But here's something crazy, Isaac, that I found out in this process too. So I got a little chunk of change, $50,000. But come to find out, you have to pay 1099 taxes on it. So the government wrongs me.
The government would like some of their money back. Yeah.
The government wrongs me and writes me a check and then says, "Oh, you owe me 20% of that." So I just used the rest of the money that I had to pay off some debt I incurred during COVID from their shutdowns. It was insane.
It's a fascinating thing. Yeah. So the money, those financial rulings are kind of the only thing that really seems to make a dent or have an effect on some of these policies. Yeah. But part of the issue, like it's been a long time, the process is kind of the punishment. And that's something that some friends of ours here in Tennessee are going through. They have some federal stuff, and they were found guilty recently. Yeah. But just even waiting for sentencing, like the amount of time that they have had to wait on pins and needles to figure out when court dates are going to be for this, when court dates are going to be for that, that has been part of the more grueling process.
Right. Yeah.
So that phrase, the process is the punishment, is I never really got it until I realized what court proceedings were like in this sort of situation.
Well, they have basically unlimited resources to pay their lawyers. They can just raise our taxes, and so they don't feel the process, and they like the long processes. Whereas like I'm Thomas More. If it wasn't for Thomas More, I wouldn't be able to go the distance in this case. But Thomas More was very kind, very supportive, and 3.5 years later is when we finally got. But it was just everything was just so slow and very problematic. And I forget the specific quote, but in Proverbs where justice is not is speedily executed, there's no justice. It's not justice. It's not healthy to have a country that has these long judicial processes. It's not right.
Yeah, it's the only people who really suffer in that are the victims. Everybody else, it's in their best interest for stuff to take a long time, except for the victims generally. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Well, what's awkward there too is so they wrote us a check, they paid our lawyers, all this stuff. I was glad to get Thomas More their money back. They were very awesome to me. But there was no apology. Like no official apology from the city. No, I just released a press release and just told everybody, hey, your taxpayer money just went to this. And then now I'm meeting with our new chief of police, who just is taking over next month, on Wednesday. And I emailed him asking, if we can meet. And he said, sure, we can meet, but I don't know why. Everything was judicially handled already. And then he said, and if you want my thoughts on what happened in 2020 as chief of police, I wasn't chief of police then, so I don't think my thoughts will be, I don't really have any thoughts because I wasn't chief of police. So he's just like, he was there at the arrest. Yeah. He was part of the arrest. And he's trying to play this card like, oh, I wasn't chief of police then, I don't need to have an answer. I'm like, dude, you're the one holding a gun and a badge. You better have an answer on what you swore, on what your oath means to me in this city. Right? Yeah. You swore an oath.
I think it's a good question. So,
well, I'll see. Yeah. I'll text you later to let you know how that meeting went.
Okay. Well, I thought that things were nicely wrapped up, but it looks like we have another cliffhanger for the listeners. The third chair is now going to be curious how that meeting with that new chief of police goes, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let me add this. I have met with our mayor since the arrest. I've met with our current chief of police since the arrest. In fact, I met with him multiple times. He's a Christian and very cordial to have good and hard conversations with. And so I've sought out trying to, they violated my First and Fourth Amendment rights. They put me through this 3.5 year legal battle. I've sought them out. None of them have sought me out. But this is what it means to be a good community member and love your neighbor, is when atrocious constitutional violations happen like this, you need to keep pushing it as far as you can and be a good community member, not get angry. I mean, I've dealt with those emotions, not get frustrated or bitter, because no one really wants to really resolve the issue in terms of like forgiveness, exchange of forgiveness. They don't care about that. So I'm just trying to do my best to be a good community member and continue to have these conversations, because I want our state and my county to be a beacon of freedom, knowing where the rest of liberal states are going. We're going into this phase of America where states' rights are going to have a whole different kind of connotation or meaning. And states' rights for liberals are going to be like, oh, we want states' rights so we can smoke weed, do porn, and commit abortions. For me, as a Christian conservative, states' rights for me in Idaho mean, well, I want lower taxes. I want to raise my kids in knowledge and fear of the Lord. I want the government off my back. I don't want a right to smoke weed. I want a right to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just smaller decentralized government. Even if the federal government were doing an amazing job, which, is hypothetically hard to imagine. But even if that were the case, there would still be a tremendous amount of safety and efficiency in having decentralized powers and limited jurisdictions and not having stuff be so top heavy. So I would be in favor of that, even if things were going just swimmingly, which is what I hear. I'm being told that things are just amazing right now at the federal level, but it's I don't know. I'm not seeing it quite as clearly as some of the pundits, I suppose.
When we're a nation that has rejected God, things get complicated, and that means our laws get complicated. Our judicial process gets complicated. Our ability to live as a free citizen gets complicated. I just got a letter from the IRS today, because apparently we had missed like $400 in taxes or something. And the letter comes certified in the mail. My wife had to sign for it. And it was for my show, Cross Politic Studios, for my studio. My wife had to sign for the letter. I opened the letter, and it's just like, if you don't give us our $400 now, we're going to start confiscating your property. I mean, it's just like, this is what tyrants do. And this is what wicked bureaucrats do. They go immediately from like, hey, you missed a payment, or you somehow you calculated wrong, you're $400 off, and they go immediately like, you better respond and give us our $400, or we're going to start taking your property. But this is what it looks like to reject God. We just complicate everything, and in a me and you and Isaac and Gabe world, I think things would be far less complicated.
I would tend towards simpler. It is one of the things that is fascinating. It's real easy to complicate stuff. It's real easy to build something, realize that it needs a fix, and then rather than make the fix in the thing that you build, you put a new fix on top. And that's always not quite as good as fixing this. So then you kind of, eventually need another fix on top. And that generally works, in software. That works for days and days. And in a nation full of Christians, that works for years and years. But it doesn't work forever. It doesn't really last. It's not a permanent fix.
I couldn't imagine, I can't see how a bureaucracy that only adds more and more to its plate can last in a healthy manner over the course of a long time. It's a house of cards. The government just, they make one bad law, and then they make another law to fix that bad law, and then they make another law to fix that bad law. I mean, George Bush gave us, No Child Left Behind, which is the mechanism in which the public school system is pushing DEI and transgenderism down everyone's throat. George Bush did that, and then when Title IX was you can say it was a well-intentioned law, good-intentioned law for schools to have equal sport participation, basically. And now they're using Title IX to require women to let men play in their sports. And just in West Virginia, this last week, or maybe it was this week on Monday, some women in the high school sports team protested playing against boys in their sports, and they're the ones who got kicked off the team.
Yeah. You when you take up arms or take a stand against the system doesn't like it, which is another reason that big systems are a problem. The big system becomes protective of itself in a way that's, people should not be reacting in this way about this stuff over here. But the system is so big that it covers all that. So it has
the Christian Protestant vision for America was a limited government vision, which meant that authority had to be well-defined and limited. That's a Christian Protestant doctrine, principle. And that meant the federal government was limited and defined. And related to that is to keep power as local as possible. And so that's why states' rights were created and keep power as local as possible and limit and well-defined government. And we're so far from that. States' rights are, more of a right to smoke weed now than actually a real. And what you're seeing too is like we have this national angst where federally everyone is, anxious, mad at one another, conservatives, Democrats, whatever. Or conservatives are mad at Speaker Mike Johnson right now because all this political angst is floating up to the federal government when actually the states' rights were a relief valve for this angst, a relief valve for this political tension that we have. And because all we think is that the federal government needs to fix our problems, when actually what it should be is like, no, state of Idaho should push back. The state of Idaho should be a wall to federal overreach. And then if I'm a conservative and I want to be in Idaho, I can live down in Idaho. If I'm a liberal and I want to be in California, I can live in California. So your political angst at the national level goes away because of states' rights. But we're heading for a boiling pot lid explosion. Yeah.
So there are. It's a little bit painful. There are ways when there are still little bits of relief that happen, stuff, springs, leaks, and so forth. There's one here that's happening in Tennessee that's kind of interesting where, Tennesseans have this reputation for being rednecks, which, you've been down here is totally untrue. But we like old, rusty vehicles that can't pass any emission standards, and we want to import cheaper vehicles and drive them around Tennessee. And it doesn't really matter to a lot of Tennesseans that these vehicles are not allowed on federal interstates. And so as Department of Transportation requirements for vehicles and vehicle importation and excise tax and all these different tariffs and all this stuff gets stacked up on top of the automotive industry, it's making cars more and more expensive. And there are a number of counties in Tennessee that have just said, you're allowed to drive whatever you want on county roads. And I think that this is going to come to a head pretty soon where Tennessee is going to be like, you can, we're going to have a totally separate vehicle registration for Tennessee roads because it is going to be impossible for us to maintain this vehicle prices going like this and inflation going like this and people's income going like this. We're just going to have to let people buy cheap cars from elsewhere, and they just won't be allowed on the interstate. And that's okay because most Tennesseans are we don't want to go to California anymore. We don't want to go to Illinois anymore. So the need for us to be on interstates may go down anyway. So there are still places where there can be that kind of relief where as stuff gets bigger and more top heavy, people are just like, fine, we'll just come back down to here. And you saw that a little bit with like Uber. Taxi regulation was making prices do this. So there was a great opportunity for Uber down here till it got regulated. Hotel regulations were bringing prices up. Airbnb was down here till they got regulated. Vaping was super cheap compared to tobacco until they got regulated. As regulations and controls pull stuff up to here where it's just too brittle and too fragile for stuff to go on, opportunities do open up down at the bottom here. And in other countries, that has resulted in a thriving black market. And in America, we still aren't really there yet. We're not ready to go there, but there might still be these cracks. In the Soviet Union, the black market was so big and so prevalent that when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a parallel economy that was the black market that apparently was big enough that, yes, it was miserable, but not really any more miserable than it had been the year before.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Interesting.
So it's It'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, and you have an interesting situation. You have kind of a front row seat into a lot of the federal ideology, but even sort of at your local level because of the political culture of the town that you're in. We're far enough away from that it's really easy for me to just know my county commissioners and mayor, and we're a red state, and we're an even redder county, and we're a pretty red town in that very red county, and it's easy for me to just kind of forget some of the stuff that's going on in Nashville and DC. But you have a test tube of it.
I honestly think, because we're in University of Idaho is in our town. They're the biggest employer in town, and obviously education is liberal. And so that's why we're literally a college town surrounded by farm fields. So you'd think we'd be conservative, but it's the university that makes us liberal. And so I think what's happening in Moscow really started 25 years ago. It's kind of been a small microcosm of what's going on nationally between Christians and liberals and Christians and even conservatives. Because, I got arrested. I ticked off a lot of old guard conservatives in town. They're like, why did you do that? Why are you raising a stink? Why are you causing problems and division and all that stuff? And I remember having a conversation with one of the conservatives. I'm like, look, I made your money. You didn't need the shutdown didn't do anything to you. Like, you aren't feeling any of this. All my friends are, not you. How are you loving your neighbor? But that was the old guard, and that's why the old guard didn't really push back, because they had their retirement, they had their money. Our governor, if you remember all the silliness, our governor shut down churches, and a bunch of my friends in North Idaho, we sued him, and he removed that from his emergency health order. And our governor's a conservative. Yeah. Our governor made it illegal to buy hydroxychloroquine over the counter during. So we're in a real mess right now. A lot of, I'd say, the national problem right now is really the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson is doing almost whatever the Democrats want him to do, and the high-ranking Democrat Jeffries on the other side basically endorsed him to remain as Speaker of the House. The Democrats want Mike Johnson to stay, and Mike Johnson's, buckling at every turn to please the Democrats.
I've noticed that. Yeah, it's the status quo really wants to stay. That old guard really wants things to go the way that they always have been. And I think there's two sides to it. I think that there's people that really do have an agenda, and they want things to keep rolling along the agenda way. And then I do think there's a bunch of old guard folks who are like, no, normal is good, and if we just hold the course, somehow we'll swing back to normal again. Don't rock the boat. The boat will come around somehow all by itself. I think that those are both the sentiments that I hear from the things are okay, or things don't need to change, or let's not try something drastic crowd. They're either people that really do want the wrong direction, or somehow just think that this is good. Sitting quietly and building consensus with the other side is the way that you get your way, which is not really how things have gone for the last century. That's not the data.
And I've gotten in arguments with some of the old guard in Idaho about this, and they think the younger next generation of conservatives, they don't really like them. There's some angst there for sure. Like, some of the new guard conservatives are pretty anxious and angsty, and kind of like a little firebrand when they shouldn't be. So I don't mind trying to objectively look at both camps. But I told him, I said, well, first of all, if you're the old guard, you should disciple the new guard. All right, you should be thinking about discipling them and not trying to fight them. Secondly, the old guard here in Idaho lost Boise, because the old guard wanted to play it nice. The old guard wanted to, sit there and, not fight and not push back and not, the old guard just kind of sat there in their comfy conservative retirement voting block and lost Boise. The mayor in Boise is liberal. It's been 2 elections now that she's been liberal. They can't get a conservative right now to be mayor of Boise, and she's doing DEI stuff and all sorts of crazy stuff down there. But Boise was lost under the old guard. How many states that you can think of where the old conservative guard lost their state or lost their city? Colorado was a big one. Boise, Idaho. I mean, go down the list. How many how many liberal states or liberal cities have conservatives taken over? I can't think of any. I can think of liberals taking over cities and states from conservatives. I can't think of the reverse, where conservatives took over a city or a state.
Yeah. Now, theoretically, you should be able, well, the problem is the economies in so many of these places are so bad that nobody wants to move there. Yeah. So the voting is just going to get worse. Even if it's fair, the voting is just going to get worse because nobody who wants to work and to build wants to go to California or Illinois. So that's kind of rough. So one of the things that you have been doing, in addition to legal pushback, and you had a fascinating and unique opportunity to do some legal pushback. Also, I love a comment that you made 4 years ago on the show where you said, courage is a muscle. Yeah. You can't just expect that you're going to be courageous enough and morally strong enough at the big battle if you haven't been training in the small battles. And I think that is a great concept for people to think about, because I think that throughout 2020, people are like, well, this is no good, but it's not enough. Well, this is no good, but it's not enough for us to stand up. I'm not going to stand up until we reach some sort of magical Rubicon place. And they kept redefining where the Rubicon was because they kept not having enough moral courage to stand up for the little stuff. So in the last 4 years, I thought that was a great comment, by the way, you have been flexing and training your courage muscles, both in continuing this legal fight with some help from others, but you've been continuing to build your podcast network and I know other community stuff in Moscow. In fact, I hear about Moscow a lot more these days than I used to.
The Moscow mood,
which is kind of fun. I've talked about it a little bit on the show, but I don't know if we have time to go into how you are a Christian nationalist or not. But what are some of the things that you have been doing in your community with podcasting to continue to grow and to build? I'd love to know more about that, because this is something that we talk about when we see each other, but we see each other pretty rarely, and we see each other when we are both at our you're at your busiest.
That's right.
So let's just chat about that for a second, because we rarely get to.
There's a couple things there. Talk about like technology and kind of building anti-fragile communities and using county roads instead of the interstate highways because the federal government's being dumb and stuff like that. Podcasting is, I would say, it's like new media 2.0, something like that. It's in that category for me. And I remember, so we started our show Cross Politic, Jesus is Lord Over Politics, back in 2016 because we felt like the church nationwide had not discipled its people on how to apply the Bible to politics and culture well at all. Christians would go to church Monday, on Sunday, hear a good gospel message, and then Monday through Friday they would tune into Rush Limbaugh because that's the only guy that was talking conservative politics. So we had this generation that was very disconnected from the Bible and conservative values. And I think that's why we have the kind of conservatism we see now, which is more like almost a libertarian kind of conservatism. Now you got Trump advocating for certain abortion policies. You got, even conservative states kind of thinking about voting to legalize marijuana, stuff like this. So you got this weird kind of Christian libertarianism, conservative libertarianism coming out because we've disconnected the Bible from our conservative values and principles. And so in 2016, actually, I applied to start some radio shows on local radio stations and I would talk to the manager, and the manager's like, yes, please apply. We got tons of hours open. We need help. Yes. And then my show title was something like Jesus is Lord Over Politics kind of title, and I would never hear back. So
I'm not super surprised, but go on.
So I started...
But
not surprised. But so I started podcast because that's the only thing I could do, and I'd never done it. But I got my pastor to join me, my friend Knox to join me. And what I quickly figured out is how strategic podcasting is. It's kind of like, the Gutenberg Press 2.0. And this is why I think T.Rex and what you guys are doing, and I think podcasting is so valuable and helpful because, first of all, now people are moving into a world where they can consume content on their own time and not have to deal with the TV schedule. Oh, the show's going to come on at 11 p.m. or Tucker's going to be on at 8, whatever. So the whole way of people consuming technology is changing rapidly, and podcast is going to be there, like radio in a lot of ways. Talk radio, at least right now, is not going away. But you have the podcasting. Yeah. I mean, I remember the first download we got from someone in Australia. I was like, oh. So I can sit, in my attic studio in little old Moscow, Idaho, and then my podcast can go around the world. And with one, like in a 10-second delivery mechanism, you press the button and it's there in someone's iPhone in Australia. Yeah. So I think the mechanism, the kind of Gutenberg 2.0, like they can't cancel that. So where YouTube might be able to cancel a show, or where Google might be able to kick you off here and there, audio, you can't squash it. You can't kill it. So it's just a very anti-fragile way of generating content and distributing out to your base, and really encouraging people and helping people in a significant way. So that's I kind of grew in this world. There's first wave podcasting probably happened around 2010, 11. Second wave, there's a big second wave podcasting that started in about 2015, 16. And that's where we jumped into that wave and got started off pretty fast. And then you had, social media, video, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube really pick up steam following kind of 2016, 17, 18. They started live streaming and all this stuff. So, whether we're doing it because we're doing it for ministry, we want the gospel to go out into politics and culture, or your company like T.Rex, it's just great brand development for what you're doing, and there's all sorts of interesting opportunities there with it.
Yeah, I have enjoyed with our podcast being able to have interviews with people and kind of develop bigger thoughts as social media has gotten smaller and shorter all the time. The thoughts are getting smaller because there's restrictions on characters, there's restrictions on this, there's restrictions on that, or people are just chasing that shorter and shorter and shorter video loop that will get you more views because it's only 5 seconds long. As all of that has kind of diminished, and there's just a limit to how much you can develop a thought in that amount of time. Now, slogans are great. They're important. They're valuable. But being able to really work through some stuff and think through some things is really important. And I appreciate that podcasts, I am real short on podcast consumption time at the moment. I used to listen to podcasts and audiobooks while I made holsters, and I don't really make holsters anymore, so I don't have as much listening time as I used to. But it was great. I could read a book and do pretty intensive work with my hands at the same time. I could listen to conversations that I didn't have time to be a part of. I could hear people think out loud and bounce ideas off of people that I didn't have access to. So it is a fascinating thing that allows for some of the most valuable people in society, those frontline workers who are actually doing the thing, actually making the thing, making the value, building the wealth, to continue to grow and to develop in a way that in the past, that was tricky. You could listen to the radio, but you were limited to whatever the radio schedule was. The only way that you could really continue to read and to grow and to develop in some of these ways is if you had lots of free time, or if you had a kind of a white collar job that allowed you to do that. So I think it's a really fascinating thing that hopefully historians will look back on and see that it was a much bigger deal than people thought it was, because the media focused on the murder podcasts and Joe Rogan, but I think that as usual, that's the froth on the top of the wave. The big stuff was happening underneath, and people didn't really notice it at the time. I think
there's so much there. So first of all, nightly news averages about 1.2 million views a night. Fox gets 1.8. I think CNN gets like 800,000, something like that. So it's like 1.2 average on nightly news. Fox is at 1.8, and out of 1.8 million people, 150,000 of those people that tune into Fox for nightly news is ages 55 and younger. meaning Fox and nightly news and mainstream media is not going to be around next 20 years if they don't solve that problem. The next generation's consumption habits are so different, and it's all driven by the iPhone, of course, smartphone. And so, I haven't ran the numbers in a long time, but we were getting something like 150,000 downloads a month or something like that. So we were, significantly, our audience is probably that bell curve from 25 to 45. So I think there's a real opportunity in the next 20 years, maybe less, maybe even less, for new media 2.0 to take over the voice and center of what's called mainstream media right now. I can't encourage people enough to use this moment. There's a real shift happening right now.
Yeah, and going back to decentralization, I love that it is decentralized. There isn't a single figure. Obviously, there's going to be your Joe Rogans. There's going to be people who get a lot of attention, but I'm happy with the T.Rex podcast and a lot of the episodes, not every episode, but a lot of the stuff that we've done and talked about, I think has been good, helpful, encouraging. But I also know that it's not all hanging on us. If I got hit by a bus or I handed the podcast off to somebody else, I know that there's a whole bunch of people out there covering a whole lot of really good territory. I love that it is diffused and decentralized and isn't all hanging on some main podcaster. To save everything, to fix everything.
Like anything, it highlights your strengths and weaknesses, right? You guys are a leader in the industry, and so you guys have learned a lot through that whole process. You've learned how to start a business and grow a business, and you've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so, what a great way to talk about, and what great content for your audience to go through all that. It's really good. And then the other thing I like about podcasting is all the interviews that we're able to do. Interviews, hardly anybody had access to platforms back in the day. You'd only could go on, radio or Fox or CNN, whatever. You're very limited. Now you can be interviewed on all sorts of shows, and I love our interviews. I love talking to people, whether I agree with them or not. We've had disagreeable interviews and agreeable interviews, but it's that's iron sharpens iron, and so there's just. And then for the audience to see that conversation and kind of participate in that conversation in their chair, drinking a beer or Dr. Pepper or whatever, and to be able to participate from a kind of a community standpoint, it's a very powerful engine of kind of knowledge and discipleship development.
I need to get more unfriendly interviews set up, because I pretty much just talk to people that I personally want to talk to.
Yeah, sure.
But I enjoy off the podcast having more complicated conversations. One of my favorite interviews that you did was with Peter Hitchens. I'm pretty sure that was you a few years ago now. And I love hearing people who have they're on the same page and they have some cultural differences or they have some ideological differences, and that sharpening, I think, is really neat. And he talked about some stuff about Brexit that I hadn't thought about, and other things that I hadn't really considered. And so I really appreciate that you guys have done a great job of finding folks like that. And you've had some Daily Wire people on after a big kerfuffle. You had Ben Shapiro on before the big kerfuffle.
We had Ben on when he was still in really California, neat. And we had Ben on before we were doing video. Yeah. So we started off audio only, and we had Ben on when we were only doing audio only. I think he was driving down the highway going to pick up his kids from school when he called into our show. And the funny thing about the Ben Shapiro interview is we asked him, hey, what are your thoughts about Jesus? And
yes,
it was very fascinating
because he was wanting to be polite because he was on your turf, and it was interesting.
It was, and someone had clipped that question that we asked him, and it was no video, but they put it on their YouTube channel with some sort of graphic on the audio, and that clip of us asking Ben about Jesus and so forth went viral, went all over the place. The guy didn't link back to us. didn't say where the show came from, where the interview came from, and everything. That was a little disappointing, but it was cool that it went viral.
Yeah. I've had that a couple of times too. I mean, Lucas has had that. He's had video clips. At this point now, everyone recognizes Lucas. But do you remember seeing an animated gospel map back in the day spread across Facebook? That was something that I worked on, and a ton of people have posted that on different places with the watermark just neatly cropped out.
Oh, wow.
And then, so that's, that was kind of fun. Business Insider posted it at one point and did an article. And I was like,
could have interviewed me.
Guys, I could have answered that question. You had a really obvious question in your article.
Yeah, there's some things that need to be sorted out with the internet and YouTube and being able to crop videos and all that stuff. Sure. But at this point, I'm like, if it gets a lot of views, then that's, what I wanted to do, whether I got, credit for it or not.
My hope is, I don't think I'm ever going to achieve this, but my hope would be that, we are careful enough, cautious enough, and articulate enough that even if people take stuff out of context and it goes viral, it is still helpful. Yeah. And that's hard because in off-the-cuff conversations, it's really easy to just talk, and be like, you had Ben Shapiro on before the kerfuffle. Right. That's not a helpful, that doesn't communicate any deep theological significance.
Yeah, well, and as you followed Moscow over the years, there's just lies and controversies that surround us, and people have taken our books out of context and our videos out of context, our clipped aspects of our show out of context, and just let it go viral. And I think one of the things I've learned about that side of the business is, for one, trust in God. He's obviously in control of the situation. Whatever's going to happen, he's somehow going to work it out for good. And the other thing is just keep moving and plowing ahead, even though you're being lied about, or even though you're being misrepresented. Like, just keep moving, keep going, get bigger. In some sense, just get bigger than them, and keep doing. It's like we've been in this controversy, Christian nationalism to federal vision, all this stuff in our community. And Doug goes on Tucker a couple weeks ago and just had a great interview with Tucker, and so clarifying, and was able to speak freely without the noise. And it was just, that's what you do. You just get bigger than the conversation, and you define your terms well, and just hope people listen.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you, because I don't like the completely insane, ridiculous slander for, I guess, maybe an odd reason. I actually find it pretty easy to ignore. The problem for me is then that sort of becomes my default mode for all criticism. Yeah. And I believe that there's a lot of legitimate criticism of me that I should probably be listening to. And all the noise over here that is just obviously insane, like, I guess people don't call us lizard people, but that level of insane, clownish criticism kind of inoculates you a little bit against actual constructive criticism, to the point where you miss it. How have you worked on that? Because you guys get some crazy off the wall stuff that probably has taught you good ignoring skills. Yeah,
that you don't want to become inoculated or immune to criticism just because there's a lot of mean people out there that are lying and misrepresenting you. I think honestly, my wife is a straight shooter. So one, I got my wife who won't let me get away with anything, and she's not a nag or any. I'm not talking to her any of that sort of way. She's a straight shooter. So having a solid wife, I think, who cares about truth too. Obviously she cares about her husband and wants to see her husband succeed and all that stuff. So my wife's really good at that. Secondly, I have a lot of friendships nationwide that I trust in this business, and so if I'm hearing from them, I'll listen. I think it's pretty easy to distinguish between kind of the lying and slander and noisy crowd, and your friends who like text you and be like, man, that what did you just say there on the show? And then we can have good conversations. I have listeners who I've called because they really pushed back on something we said on the show or in a tweet I said something, and they're very genuine. And so I'll literally set up a call and talk to them. If they're genuine and they really have strong answers and strong opinions and they're pushing back, I want to hear from it. And I literally did that last month with a listener pushing on me on Twitter. So I think, having, I'll maybe add this too. I mean, obviously humility is a big part of this. I'm always ready and willing to be wrong. Although I believe what I say is true, or I believe what I'm saying is true, I'm willing to, in principle, I don't know everything. I'm not omniscient and everything. So I think that's another part of this is having the kind of humility where you're standing on truth. It's not like this cowardly humility, but having this kind of humility where you're standing on truth, standing on God's word, saying and speaking your convictions, and yet also be willing to listen to your friends who are honest. They aren't liars. They have convictions too, and be ready to have good conversations. I think the Bible says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. So especially with radio hosts or podcast hosts like me, you got to have that in your back of your mind that you're speaking a lot of words, and you need to make sure you're humble enough to listen to your friends who deserve your respect and feedback.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful. I think about that verse a lot, and James 1, let not many of you become teachers, because podcasting, it's really easy. At the moment, I'm trying to think, we are 214 episodes in or something like that. So there have been a lot of words over the last 4 years. And it is very easy to, I think, it's easy to get careless. As stuff gets easier, it's easier for you to just come in and turn on the mic and start talking. And it's easy as you get more and more pushback from people who really don't have your best interest at heart. It is not constructive criticism to ignore that. So I appreciate your thoughts on that, because I think it does take a lot of vigilance to maintain the not just the humility, but knowing who to really listen to and pay attention to. And for me personally, I have a very interesting situation where I have one foot very solidly in the firearm community and one foot very solidly in the Christian homeschooling reformed, apparently boat rocking community. And it is really easy for me to have different standards for different communities, and it is easy for me to speak differently to different people based on things. And I don't think that I'm trying to, curry favor anywhere, but just like be all things to all men. Use this vocabulary over here, use this vocabulary over here, take this into account over here, take this into account over here. But I think that it is an extra layer of opportunity to put your foot in your mouth or step, forget who it is that you're talking to sometimes. And I see Christians do that all the time, where they see a politician do a horrific thing and they're like, yeah, he's on our side though. And then they see a brother do a minor thing and they're like, well, that guy should have known better because he's one of us.
Yeah, so. And I think, communication is, God designed it, and he gave tools for people to communicate from Moscow, Idaho to internationally all over the place. So, and there's all sorts of communication barriers and problems that can come with that. And you just, I think, do your best to say truth based on your convictions of how you read the Bible. And, sometimes, Paul wrote to the Galatians, and everyone reads that letter. Paul wrote to the Romans, and everyone, so I think communication, people who God's given a voice to, it's a gift. It's a gift from God to be able to have a voice in politics. It's a gift from God to have a voice in Second Amendment life and industry. But you speak on your convictions based on the truth you have, and I don't mind tailoring my message to someone in Texas versus someone in Idaho. That doesn't bother me because I really want to speak to their needs and where they're at. But what I will absolutely get my conscience is if I'm soft pedaling or being shy about what I think I really need to say in that moment. So it's more of a disposition that if I feel any sort of like I need to adjust this because I'm nervous I might mess this friendship up, or I need to adjust this because I might cause a firestorm or whatever, those kind of cowardly temptation feelings, I want to kill that. And so I don't have a problem tailoring messaging, but I do have a problem I guess maybe letting a little coward in me kind of creep into that moment and what I need to speak. So I would want to make a distinction between that and speaking the truth to someone in Texas based on where they're at, and speaking the truth to someone in Tennessee based on where they're at.
Yeah. Well, courage is a muscle. It takes effort to to fight back that cowardice and that fear of man and say, well, I want this guy to like me when I'm talking to him, and I want this guy to like me when I'm talking to him. But really try to discern that what is actually going to be the most helpful, what is actually going to be the most constructive and encouraging thing. And
I'll just add to one thing there.
And I think
I'll just add one thing there is
sure.
is you also, everyone has different gifts and abilities, and this applies to the public speaking world too. I don't know much about Second Amendment industry. Isaac does, right? I am not a well spoken rhetorician. I don't write books. That kind of stuff. And some people can write a really good book and are horrible public speakers. So you got this. Mm-hmm. So you want to work within the framework of the gifts that God has given you, whether you're writing a book or speaking on a podcast. And I think that you find some. Put it this way too. There's a real security in living in Christ. There's a real security in reading the Bible and knowing what God the Father thinks about me and this world. And if you don't know the Heavenly Father well, you're going to be insecure, and it's going to come out in different ways. And so I'm not afraid that I'm going to go on my show next week and I'm going to say what I believe I need to say. I'm not afraid of also making mistakes, because I'm secure in my Father, and I know if I did something wrong, I need to make it right and ask for forgiveness. That doesn't adjust. That doesn't make me shy away from what I think I need to say, speaking truth on that microphone. Now, I have security in the Lord. I have security in the Lord and confidence in the Lord to go on the show to say what I need to say, and I have security and confidence in the Lord to confess my sins if I made a mistake. That security in Christ works both ways,
yes,
and everything. So, and that really, in things like we do, like the Fight Laugh Feast conference. You're actually speaking at our Business Makers pre-conference in Texas. The things that we do at that conference, the things that we've chosen to do on our show, like we've tried to be very consciously principled in how we do our show. I trust in the Lord. I'm very secure in the Lord, and I'm also I'm also ready to make changes where my pastors call me out, where my wife calls me out, where my friends call me out. There's a difference between standing on firm ground and conviction and being hard-headed. And
yes,
that's what.
Yeah. Are you standing on solid ground, or are you
being hard-headed? Yeah,
solid in yourself. Yeah. Yeah. There's I think that you guys have modeled that well. That is well said. And I think that you guys have modeled that well. And I also appreciate the humility and the number of people that you have brought onto your network. Just there's such a wide variety of folks on your podcasting network now, and it's been really neat to see that grow and develop. And different people with different gifts and different knowledge. That's really neat.
Yeah.
That's really neat to see too. And you're getting new audiences. I remember when I started listening to you guys, it felt like it was a very specific group of people that you were reaching, and the podcast was for people who were exactly like me, but more Presbyterian, perhaps. And now you're talking to a huge chunk of the
we
country.
started, so crosspolitic.com is our show's website. FightLaughFeast.com is our network's website. So we started kind of this podcast network because, we believe all of Christ for all of life for every subject. And we didn't want Christians to just become so myopically focused on politics and faith, which is what our topic and our show's about. So we brought on we got a former Major League Baseball pitcher, Mark Dewey, who does a baseball show called In the Bullpen. I mean, he is, I say this all the time, he's one of our best voices on the network. He's fantastic. And I grew up liking baseball and fell out of love with it because I got bored of it. The games got longer and longer on TV. But like, I go and listen to Mark, and like, he makes me want to love baseball all over again. And even if you don't like baseball, like, you got to listen to him. He's just fantastic. He's a solid Christian brother, and he knows how to weave story and baseball with Christ together. It's so good.
Yeah.
So we brought that on. We got A.D. Robles. We got the Pugcast guys. We got Canadian shows now on our network. We've been building a lot of friendships with the good Canadians who are standing up against their blackface Trudeau up there. And then, Lord willing, eventually I would love to have a podcast in Great Britain, Scotland, Australia. We got a big audience in Australia and Tasmania. I would really just kind of like to use the platform God's given us and bring on other people who are faithful Christians in their issue, their topic. I mean, I want to do a hunting show podcast. I want to do a sports center show podcast. I want to do a cooking show podcast, a wine drinking podcast, tasting different wines and talking about, the glory there. Basically, I want all of Christ for all of life for any subject. And that's what we want to do. And this goes to kind of my long-term plans. And then I gotta go pick up my kids here in a minute. This goes to my long-term plans. What I really want to do with the Fight Laugh Feast Network is I want to turn it into a real TV network. And the reason for that is partly what we discussed here already, is because there's a real opportunity in these next 20 years to take over mainstream media that's fading away. I gave you the stats earlier. And we're already developing our network for Media 2.0. We aren't addicted. We're on DirecTV and we're on Xfinity, but that's not our we aren't beholden to that pipeline. So the old cable cutting cord's happening, and we're already geared towards, we're the Uber in the industry, and mainstream media is the yellow cab. And so I think in podcasting and TV network and stuff like that, it's such an amazing discipleship tool where you got, Fox gets 2 million people a night. That, you just imagine discipling 2 million people Monday, 2 million people Tuesday, 2 million. It's a great discipleship tool, and that's why it's like, and by discipleship, I don't mean just some sort of didactic exchange of communication. I mean sitcoms disciple, hunting shows disciple, cooking shows, sports disciple, and so those are all.
It's those presuppositions that really matter, and come through those things.
I mean, when Bruce Jenner got the ESPY Awards from ESPN as a woman in 2017. When that happened, I was like, I have to take over SportsCenter. I don't know how it's going to work, but I'm going to do it somehow. It is like they're giving men women's awards, and he wasn't a woman when he got that, when he did all his Olympic stuff. He was a man.
I know he got an award for manly activities, but he got the women's award because of how he identified at the time. Well, it's kind of like how he got Woman of the Year award when he hadn't even been a woman for a whole year yet. That's a classic joke. Well, I know that you've got to run, but I have. I'm encouraged, and one of the things that I think is going to happen as we watch, the internet used to be so free, and then it kind of consolidated around these publishing centers, Google and Facebook and Twitter, and the algorithms used to be really good. Everything collected there, and then the algorithms were really good at showing me what I wanted to see. And I think that as the algorithms get worse, And I think they're getting worse for two reasons. Number one, they're politically
Yes.
motivated. That's kind of undeniable. But also, the systems have gotten so complicated that a friend of mine used to work at Facebook, and he said they don't know what the algorithms do anymore. The unintended consequences that come from the tweaks are unbelievable. The system is so unwieldy at this point that it can no longer be guaranteed to give you what you're looking for, even if they wanted you to see it. And so I think people are realizing that they're going to have to work a little harder to go find the things that they want to see. So as much as they would like to just consume everything on YouTube, I think people are ready again to go back to find this blog here and this video site here and this thing over here and take a little more responsibility for the curation. And that opens up a huge amount of possibility where in the past we've watched people attempt that and there just wasn't the audience there. But I think that the mainstream audience is ready to do some of their own media curation and not have a gigantic all-in-one publishing house do it for them. So that's the thing to be ahead of the curve.
There's a couple things there. One is that's why we actually developed our own app, our Fight Laugh Feast app. You can go download it in your app store, Fight Laugh Feast. So we're curating all our network's content there. Secondly, this is kind of the nature of whenever there's major industry shifts, everything scatters, and then eventually everything will gather again. So right now we're in a big scattering phase of it. And then I'd say lastly, cancel culture is really silly. We've been suspended multiple times from YouTube. I'm still surprised we're on YouTube. Vimeo just kicked us off their platform in August. So I got an email one day saying we canceled your access to us. You're no longer allowed on our platform. And I responded and I said, well, how do I get all my videos? We've had a 6-year or 7-year relationship with Vimeo. And then they just sent me a bunch of Excel spreadsheet links with all our videos to download. I mean, it's crazy. And they just took and our content wasn't public on Vimeo. We were using Vimeo to distribute all.
Right. You were using the enterprise solution.
We're using Vimeo to distribute all our content to our supporters in our what we call the pub portal, like club portal, pub portal. And so it was going to password protected behind a firewall, and they still deleted us. And so, but that kind of business, it's not logical, and logic doesn't work in the long run. And so I think, people talk about the red economy or the patriot economy or the, I'm happy with all those terms, the Christian economy. I like all that. It makes a lot of sense to me. But what's funny about this vision of this parallel economy, it's like we're Christians and we want to do business with people we trust. Like that's it. The bar's so low, right? And we want to do business with people we trust. And which means like liberals, you'll cancel us all day. We're glad to do business with you. You come here, give me your green dollar. I'll sell you, podcast software all day. I'll sell you, you'll definitely sell them a gun all day, kind of thing. And so we want to. So we aren't canceling. We're actually trying to bless all our neighbors with what this new Christian parallel economy is going to look like. I mean, the Bank of America is getting sued, I think, by 12 states now for debanking Christians. You can Google it. I actually got some guys coming on in the next couple of weeks to talk about that. But they're happy to. I had a friend who just got canceled from YouTube and was making about $100,000 a month on their advertising platform with all his videos. He has over 1 million subscribers, so forth. And so they're more than willing to take away your ability to provide food on the table for your wife and kids. That's how bad that is, and it's not going to last. And you're seeing with Twitter, Twitter's going to win. Twitter's going to be the place to go over the next 20 years, 5 years. You're going to see this in 5 years. Twitter's going to be the biggest social media platform in the next 5 years. And Elon, I got suspended by Twitter on their old regime. I got blacklisted. I got all that stuff under the old regime. But Elon is building it in a way you can trust it. He's being predictable. He's exposing his algorithm so everyone can see it. He's going to win. And he's already rebuilt his advertising platform where it's so easy to advertise on his platform, whereas before. So there's just a lot of adjustments happening in this media world that I think are pretty exciting. And
it's fascinating time. Yeah, I got to say, I didn't used to be a big fan of Elon, but he has certainly grown on me. Coincidentally, at the exact same time that the left decided that they hated him. I think that's but he did get the $16 from me. I'm paying him
Me
money
too.
on Twitter.
Me too.
But I mean, and this is I don't know if this was his idea, but it is a mark of genius. I'm paying for Twitter because I am bugged so much by my own typos. You have to pay to be able to edit your own typos out, and they got me.
Well, I think the thing I appreciate.
If that's not an indication that you're going to win,
the thing I appreciate about the blue check mark for me is it kind of goes back to that trust, that currency of trust. It's like, oh, this guy's serious on social media. I'll converse with him. He's paying for that experience, and that means he's serious. And so I think he's probably a little more serious than the guy who's got some sort of weird Twitter handle and doesn't even have a picture of his face up there and that kind of thing. So the blue check mark is kind of a filtering for me. So
it is kind of interesting. Yeah, there are so many people on Twitter just to complain about Elon Musk that if there's a blue check mark, at least they're willing to give him money. Yeah. There's plenty of people who are double-minded enough to do that, but at the moment, it's a decent filter. So. Yeah, I never thought when we were talking 4 years ago that Twitter would come back as the place with a future. A lot of stuff has changed in 4 years. Yeah. So, thank you so much for coming on the show. I was going to ask you to plug some stuff, but you very deftly wove in most of the stuff that I think that you are doing. The show that you do, the network, the app, I think you covered most of it. Is there anything that we didn't cover? You even mentioned the conference that is happening in October.
Yeah, well, I like to end with you.
I got to learn how to be that level of, so smooth.
You're going to be speaking at we do a pre-Business Makers conference at our Fight Laugh Feast conference in October in Fort Worth. And you'll be speaking at the Business Makers conference, and you can go to prodigalamerica.com to sign up for that conference and meet Isaac in person in Fort Worth.
It's true. I will be there, barring any amazing catastrophes, which could still happen. It is an election
days
year.
Before the election.
And I want to thank you. Yeah, it's going to be, So it's, I appreciated you guys coming to Tennessee so many times with your conferences and the things that you've been doing with your conferences. And so I'm looking forward to this one in Texas. You'll be home. I've lived in Texas before. It still doesn't feel quite like home anymore, but I will be glad to be there with you guys. And thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate the work that you've been doing and the consistency that you've been doing it with. The only thing is I wish we had more time to talk. So if you were a little less diligent, I have a feeling that we would chat a little more often. But I've appreciated watching your conversations with other people, and it's great having you on the show.
Thank you, Isaac, for having me. Appreciate it.